So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I know there's a whole lot going on this weekend with Pride, with Philippine Heritage Month, National Indigenous Heritage Month as well. Am I missing anything? There's a lot. So the fact that y'all are here on a Sunday afternoon, like we really, really appreciate it. So thank you for coming. So first off, my name is Victoria Partosa. I'm a community organizer with the Filipino Canadian Youth Alliance and the Philippine Women's Centre. These are the two arms that are housed under the Magkaisa Centre, which is how we published our book, if you haven't already purchased a copy. And our third arm is our workers' arm, or SICLAB. We just don't have the banner today. Outside of this, I am a policy advisor for the Anti-Racism Directorate. That's my 9 to 5, but this is my 24/7. You feel me? So that's us. Let my co-presenter introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. It's so weird to have a mic.
Hates the mic, but it's for the video. Okay?
So again, thanks for coming, right? Especially how it's Sunday and we're gonna talk about some history. I know it's not like the first choice, but it's good because it's a Filipino Heritage Month, and let's get to know our roots, right? My name is Kebs. It's Kevin, but like, Filipinized, like you just, how do you say it? Just change the V to B and then just add Z or whatever just to make it cool, right? I'm part of the Filipino Canadian Youth Alliance, this banner here, and I've been part of it for about 12 years. 12 years, yeah. It started when I was in second year university. I guess you guys can do the math, how young I am. Kunyari, kabataan, kunyari youth. But yeah, thanks again for coming.
So I guess I didn't even explain who we are, right? So the Magkaisa Centre is a community center which houses the three arms. One of the arm organizations is Ugnayan ng Kabataan ng Pilipino sa Canada, or Filipino Canadian Youth Alliance in English. So we like to call ourselves UKPC for short, but now you know what that means. So that's the youth arm, and that's how I got to know a lot of the leaders and organizers around this room. I started in 2017. But the Philippine Women's Centre is our women's arm, and then SICLAB is our workers' arm. And what we do is we like to educate, organize, and mobilize around Filipino issues in Canada specifically. So we look at different policies and issues and programs under the various governments of this place called Canada, and we look at them and we kind of study how they affect us as a community. And once we know that, then that's how we kind of are able to sort of figure out what we need to do from there. And so one of the things that manifested out of this work is that book you see right here. Somebody show it real quick. We wrote a book last year. We did 3 workshops last summer. It all happened through Zoom miraculously, not miraculously, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, okay? And we were looking at, what kind of art form can we use to keep the community engaged in a way that's super accessible to anybody, regardless of their experience and where they're from, and do it all online. So we landed on writing, thanks to our writer over here, Miss Christina. And we called it This Is Home because we wanted to explore what that term even means for us, right? I think as Filipinos, we're often so excluded in this place. I like to look at our Black and Indigenous sisters and brothers and organizations and be like, damn, how do we get into the mainstream narrative like that, right? And I think for our community, because we're a little younger, in terms of when we came to Canada, we're still just trying to get on the map, right? And so part of this is part of all of that work. If you haven't bought a copy, please buy a copy and engage with us. Let us know what you think from reading the book. Okay, so before I begin, we're gonna do a land acknowledgement. Hi, feel free to come inside, don't be shy. Okay. So we acknowledge that we are meeting here today on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and that Toronto is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Toronto is a Mohawk word meaning where there are trees standing in the water, or a gathering place. And so we acknowledge that as immigrants coming to Canada through forced migration from our own history of colonization, we stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples in Canada and their struggle for self-determination. So this is a photo of Kuya Manny writing Balik Ugat, Balik Komunidad. So why did we call it B.U.B.K Sundays? Balik Ugat, Balik Komunidad means back to our roots, back to our community. And so the fact that we're doing our critical Philippine history workshop, of course, on Filipino Heritage Month, it's exactly that, right? Like, how do we know our history so that we can know the way forward? But yeah, we also wanted to call back to a project that we did under UKPC. So this was 2008, I think as part of Counterspin. And so yeah, it's a bit of a full circle moment for us to be like calling back to that work today in 2022. Oh my God, and before I keep going, thank you to Justin and Ivy and the whole BB's and Sorry team for hosting us in this space. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are so, so grateful for this space and this opportunity. Okay, that's enough. Now we're gonna do an icebreaker because we wanna know where y'all are from. So I'm gonna let Kebs lead this. We're just gonna ask you to let us know, and then like Philippine independence to present day. So we're packing this all into like an hour and a half, 2 hours max. So we might breeze through a couple slides and some different pieces of content. But if you guys want to do something more in depth in the future, let us know and we can set that up for you for sure. Yeah, so we just want to say that first. Yes, next. So yeah, the Philippines is 7,000 islands strong. There are 3 major regions, the Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Do we have anybody from the Mindanao region in here? Okay. Hi, Jason. Okay. Okay, cool. Because
Where in Mindanao? Where in Mindanao?
okay. Because typically we never have anybody from there except like our one Joel. Okay. Yeah, there's 102 million people, 17 different regions, over 170, 180 languages, many dialects, and 8 major languages. Excuse us if we like spill in some Tagalog here and there. If you don't know what we're saying, just be like, what does that mean? Or just yell it out and we'll translate, because like that's just what we do. It's mostly Catholic and also Muslim in terms of the religions. Next slide. So yeah, we went through that. Maybe we can share the link after if folks want to do that quiz. Just contact Kebs or just nudge him and we can share that link with you, because it's kind of a fun way to study your geography, because Lord knows I need it. So next slide. So the objectives of this workshop today are to have a more deeper understanding of the history of the Philippines, beyond just dates and what happened and who colonized us. We want it to be critical Philippine history, right? And the lens that we're taking today is like we want to focus on the moments of resistance in our history, because I think we're told a lot of different narratives about like who Filipinos are, right? Shout something out in terms of what first comes to mind in terms of like what a Filipino person is like. Don't be shy. Jollibee, okay. Mahinhin, like very like subtle, gentle or like obedient, right? Like good working, whatever, right? Anyone else want to say something? Caretakers, hell yeah. Can't wait to get into that with you in the future. Yeah, there's so much. But the truth is, like, we come from a long, long line of resistance, right? And so throughout our history, there were so many moments of resistance against our colonizers. And I think we need to remember that so that going forward, we can remember that strength and remember where we came from and know the way forward. Next slide. So the first section will be on pre-colonial history. So before Spain arrived and fucked us up, I'm gonna try to be fast because the juicier parts are in Kebs's piece towards the end. Next slide. All right. So there are lots of different theories in terms of like who the Filipino people are in terms of. Just come in, bitch. Sorry, excuse my French. Yeah, there were different distinct ways of migration according to H. Otley Beyer, different land bridges connecting us to different regions of the world, and some believe that we descended from Negritos and Malays. Next slide, please. This is F. Landa Hocano, and according to him, there were no clear waves of migration. He was a Tabon man, and he states that we are Southeast Asians and products of a long process of human evolution and later movements of people. And so we have a lot of similarities ethnically to like Indonesians, Malays, but I like the end line here. They stand equal racially and culturally. Okay. Next slide, please. So pre-Spain, our society already had like its own ways of being. Like we already had like a societal setup, and like the main unit of like societal organization is called the barangay. And to this day, like we still use that word in Tagalog, right? Like what would you say is like the translation in English? Come on. Okay, neighborhood, community, yes. Yeah, and I think like when I was just there, like it even has like a political meaning, right? Like my uncle is like the concejal or counselor in his barangay. It's like the smallest form of government. And it's so interesting that to this day, like we still use that word. Municipal, beautiful. Yeah, exactly. But I think like it's even smaller than municipal because it's like, I think what we use here is like a riding, right? Yeah. Diba? And then spiritually, we also had our own ways of beings. We had the datu and the chieftains and the warriors. And in the next few slides, I'm also going to get into the role of women in our society, right? Because I think we're told that like Spain and the US told us that we were like uncivilized, right? Even to this day, like the term jungle Asian is something that I think we're trying to reclaim because we were like, you know, uncivilized and unruly and all this and that. But the reality is like we had our own leadership and we had our own ways of being, right? Next slide, please. So this is a picture of a boat. What's the Tagalog word for boat? Bangka. And I think that's the original meaning, right? From barangay. Balangay. Yes. But then I think we repurposed it into its current setup today. Oh, so y'all need to know that Kebs is also Ilocano, so it's like a bit confused in his brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me. My bad. Next slide, please. Okay, so matriarchs, okay. Breadwinners, okay, okay. Wow, okay. I think we have a really good narrative of Filipino women. But typically, we're told something else, right? Does anybody know who this woman is?
Oh.
Okay, so Keb's new. I guess he gets a pulver on. Uh, this is Maria Clara. Yeah, you missed out on a pulver on opportunity. Yeah, so like this is the sort of woman we were told to aspire to be under Spain. She's known to be sweet and docile and obedient and self-sacrificing. But I love, love, love that all of the terms that you all had were like way more bossy than what we were told, right? So I don't need to school you guys there. Okay, next slide. Yeah, going back to our spirituality, we also had our own creation myths. And one of the stories that's coming back to me through one of the visuals is like babae and lalaki, or man and woman coming out of a stick, which is I think is what's depicted here. But more interestingly enough, I also learned that bakla, which means gay, is learned to be, or is understood to be like a merging of those two, right? Babae and lalaki, so bakla. And I'm like, that's so dope, because in our history, we also have a lot of like non-binary queer folks who were also very bossy, as the women are. So I'll get into that a little bit. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just a couple other visuals of some creation stories or people from our history. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the babaylan. The babaylan is one of the things I like to talk about when we think about the role of women. These women were the priestesses, the shamans, like spiritual workers. I want to say back then, but I think today a lot of women and non-binary folks are reclaiming that and practicing that throughout Turtle Island. And that's how I know some of the people in this space. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I think there's a new wave happening and it's very like powerful to be part of that. So if you have questions, we can talk later. Next slide, please. So this is just a table of the differences in terms of the way that women were seen pre, during, and then during the liberation era. So yeah, you can see that before Spain, we were seen as equal with men. Even the daughters were seen as equal with sons. We were potters, weavers, farmers, and of course the babaylan. But then with Spain also came patriarchy. Oh my God. So we became wives and we became like housewives and like all of these Spanish words like cigarreras and tendera and whatever the fuck. So yeah, we'll get into that later in the Spanish part, but I just wanted to kind of shed light on the differences because we were so rich before Spain came through and colonized us. But you'll also hear that there were really, really powerful moments of resistance where we were able to protect ourselves and fight for our land. Next. Okay, so Laguna copper plate, 900 CE. This is the earliest known written document in the Philippines. So you can see some influences from Hinduism, Buddhism in this script. It also has Islam influence. Some of the first traders in the 13th century were missionaries, and that was quite dominant until the 16th century arrival of Spain. So this is just to note that like we've been here. Just because, you know, we had a lot of different European powers, I'll say, come through, like we had a long history well before that, and it's so important to sort of look back on it and remember that. Okay, next, please. In terms of religion, I think I got into it a little bit already. So we were already had Buddhist, Islam, and Hindu influences. But beyond that, we were also quite spiritual. And so does anybody know what animism means? Hell yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. And so I think that manifested into the different roles that we've already kind of touched on, the healers, the midwives, mga hilot, or masseuses is the English. It doesn't sound cool in English, right? It's like, whatever, like an RMT. Yeah, we had shamans, witches, and warlocks, priests and priestesses. I think another word for babaylan is katalonan. Yeah, some tribal historians, and we really revered elders as like really respectable sources of knowledge and wisdom for our societies then. So that's it for pre-colonial. I'm gonna get into the Spanish colonization era in just a bit, but I wanted to pause and see if anybody had any questions. Questions, comments? Everyone okay? Feel free to like move around the space and like feed yourself, nourish yourself if you gotta. Okay? If not, I'm gonna move on because we got a lot to get through. Quote for us. Because we're trying to get at why are we calling it critical Philippine history? Sorry, what's your name?
Lillian.
Lillian. Thanks, Lillian.
The more conscious they are, the more they become active and the more telling their contribution to the changing of society and the changing of their own attitudes until they come to realize that struggle is their historic right and it alone can make them free, which is by Renata Constantino.
Hell yeah, thanks Lillian. Yeah, just a quick reminder, like why we call it critical Philippine history, because we never just want to go through the dates and what happened. We want to like look at it from a critical lens so that we can use it for our present reality. Next slide, please.
No, like Renata. Quickly. So you see the books somewhere here. Those are the some of the documents we read, and maybe some of it just go through quickly. But those are the resources that we have. And Renato Constantino actually is a like a historian. I think in like the 50s, 60s that really kind of like started like looking at like Philippine history more in a critical lens, not from the perspective of American or like colonizers' perspective, but from the perspective of the Filipino people. Someone, I don't know where we put our book, but we couldn't find it, but we can. Sorry. But if people want to, yeah, it's Renato Constantino. It's basically if you want to talk like Philippine history in a critical lens. This is like the history 101, really. That's why we had.
Thanks, Cabs. Next slide, please. So a quick outline on what we'll be talking through for this portion. So I'll take you through a bit of a history of the global context at the time and why Spain colonized the Philippines or what they were really looking for on their conquest, and a bit of a description on how they colonized us in terms of the economy, politics, and society. Next slide, please. Okay, so economy. So why do you think, what do you think Spain was looking for, and how do you think they ended up in the Philippines? Gold. Ding, ding, ding. You get a pulveron. Sorry, Mish. I should have warned you. So here you'll see a map of the world, and you might not be able to see, but basically these are the colonial demarcation lines between Castile or Spain and Portugal in the 15th and 16th centuries. So like they literally broke up the world and was like, this is the Portuguese side, and this is what Spain is gonna take. But the Philippines is the part that they were like, oh, we can encroach onto this side of the world and take this from Portugal. So I just, yeah, quick geography, okay? Next slide, please. Do you want to say something?
Sorry, it's just some nerdy shit. So you know we're from Spain, right? So, sorry, what's your name again? Martin. Yeah, Martin. So Martin is right. So Spain actually. Oh, Spain bypassed because this part's supposed to be Portugal, but what they did was that they went this way, so thinking that this part is still east or west. So that's why Philippines became part of uh, the sphere, even though really it's technically, I mean, from their perspective, part of Portugal. So Magellan also became the first. Anyways, fuck Magellan, but yeah, but they were able to circumnavigate the world. I mean, the world first because of that, because of gold, God, and glory. Sheesh.
Wow. G. Um, okay. So yeah, the first contact was in 1521. But is Magellan, like, does anyone know, like, is Magellan actually Spanish? Hell yeah. Oh my God, I'm like running out of pulveron. Okay. But yes, that's exactly right. You can hit the next slide. Yeah, he was Portuguese, but he renounced it. He renounced the Portuguese crown, and he was pretty much hired by by Spain to be like, all right, pull up to not just the Philippines. Like the Philippines was part of a much larger conquest, right? What were some other countries that were part of that conquest? Guam. Okay. Yo, look at these historians over here. Jeez. Okay. Okay. Beautiful. Yeah. So he was actually looking for the Maluku Islands or Spice Islands, as you said earlier, Martin. So, A plus. Next slide, please. So why colonization and not colonial? So real quick, does anybody want to read these definitions for us?
Colonization, the violent taking on control and land on a nation by violence, force, and other psychological forces, such as religious and educational control mechanism and institutions. Colonial is a more passive term that sometimes is associated with architecture during a colonial period.
Thank you. The ongoing colonization of Canada, and what's happening to Indigenous peoples here, right? Which is why I like to say that in my land acknowledgements that, yeah, like while we wrote a book called This Is Home and all this stuff, like this is never to say that like we are like claiming Canada as our own or that we're settler colonial immigrants. Like no, we're immigrants. We also come from a line of colonization and that's our history, and we need to recognize that and make those connections to Indigenous peoples, right, who are fighting for their self-determination, and our people in the Philippines who are still fighting for their self-determination, but we'll get there with Kebs's part, one thing at a time. Next slide, please. That's a copy. Next one. Okay. So how did Spain colonize the Philippines? I think Rico, you hit it. You hit it on the head. I think another thing we like to say is the cross and the sword, right? Why do we say sword, and why is it a double-edged sword? Exactly. But I like the visual connection too. Yeah, that's exactly it. We were colonized through both religion and through violence, through rape, through torture, in camps, and the main vehicle of like the colonizer was the friars, the priests, right? And I think it's important to look at that today when we still see priests that are molesting children and like in the news and shit, right? Like it makes sense. Like it's messed up that like it makes sense, but if we know the history, it like no longer seems like a shock, right? And yeah, for any folks who are like navigating like maybe their own Catholic upbringing, I myself was Catholic. I think something I like to hold is that I think it's possible to hold multiple belief systems, right? And even if we are decolonizing and looking back on our spirituality, we can still hold like those parts of ourselves and those parts of our families, right? And believe that there are many belief systems that exist. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so economy and trade. Rico hit it earlier already, and so did Martin. But it was the galleon trade, which was inaugurated in 1565 between Manila and Acapulco, or Mexico. And between the 17th and 18th centuries, there were all sorts of products coming from China, Japan, Brunei, the Moluccas, India, sent to Manila to be sold for real coins, which came by ship from Acapulco. So this is just to say that it's part of like this global network of trade, and that it wasn't like a setup of like, okay, we're gonna go to the Philippines and colonize these people. It was like this global system of the trade of goods and services, right? And so we can make those connections to other places like Guam and Cuba, like Martin said earlier, and recognize that we have some similar and shared histories there, right? And how we can work with those people to sort of advance further. Because we're not alone. Next slide, please. Okay, political control. Next slide, we can ignore that. Because, okay, historically, when we do like the full day workshop, we can like take you through like the government system, but that stuff is boring. You don't need to know that. All you need to know is that there was a Spanish government during the colonial period, and but the main vehicle that we like to think of are really the friars and the priests who were doing that work and brainwashing through the church, right? With how they did their sermons and how they told you to be as a good wife and a good husband and all this stuff. So yeah, ignore that slide. So yeah, societal control through religion, Catholicism, friars, and priests. Next slide. Okay, so here I wanted to get into the term Filipino, because we didn't even mention, like, why are we called the Philippines? Does anybody know? Yes. Okay, that's a lot of pulveron. Later, I got you later. We'll just like throw it out.
Is it the Philippines means like multiple island?
Can you give this to Lillian?
I forgot which language it is. Is it?
Yeah. And so I think like some people don't even like to identify as Filipinos because of that meaning, right? I think some people will say Filipinx if to like call on, you know, non-binary folks, or like maybe people who don't even like the term Filipino, or like I know that some people also like to call on their region and like their city, and like I am a Davaoan, I am Ilocano, I am Batangueña, that type thing. So call yourself whatever you want. Like, just we believe like you can self-identify in the way that feels best for you. But what I can appreciate is that folks from other communities, like my colleague who's Nigerian, he was like, you know, what you guys do have though is that national identity that you can call on for the unity, right? Because if you all see yourselves as Filipinos and from this place and from this history, you can use that to work together to fight for what you do want, right? So yeah, call yourself whatever you want. Next slide, please. Okay, so now the good stuff. So how did the Philippines resist colonization from Spain? Ooh, secret clubs. Tell me about these secret clubs. Oh, okay. Tell us about the real KKK. Please tell us about the real KKK. It's so... Katipunan. Ding, ding, ding. Just give them the whole box already. But I think something that we should also mention is that a lot of the resistances were quite regional, right? Up until that peak or that climax, whatever you want to call it. Because before, like, we weren't even called the Philippines, right? Those 7,000 plus islands were not a thing. Everybody was kind of on their ones or on their own and fighting each other even, right? And I think that's why I like to mention like the Babaylan and the Datu and the chieftains, because before they would just fight, we were hella organized. They would say, hello, Babaylan, hello, Datu, like, what are we gonna do? This is the situation. Are we gonna fight? Or are we gonna try to cooperate? Or are we gonna lay low? Like, we were very civilized, right? And so I think when we hear about like the Battle of Mactan and like all these different moments of resistance, I think Kebs like reminded me like these are regional moments, right? And then it climaxed into the Katipunan because they were outed, right? And so what happened when the Katipunan were found out? So the tearing of the cedulas, whatever the fuck. These are like their tax certificates. It was like something that the colonial government used to be like, okay, you are like a colonized person and you must pay taxes to the Spanish government. But then when they were outed, it was like this moment of like, all right, fuck it. Like, we're gonna rip these cedulas and we're gonna like, all right, we're here, we're about to fight. Like, so yeah, I love that you knew that. And Katipunan, yeah, I went to their museum when I was in the Philippines and I was like, crazy. Like, it was free. Anybody could just walk in and just like, it's crazy. Because you would never see that here, right? Everything, they charge for everything.
There was AC, right? There was AC there.
I don't think so. It was me and one other historian dude. Literally.
They don't want us to know it, right?
It's there, like the door is open, you can go, like it's free, but like it's not in Manila proper. It's in San Juan. So it's a bit of a mission, right? If you're familiar with Manila, like a lot of traffic, it's really big, a lot of people, but if you're a nerd, you should go. Cuz it's so important, right? Okay. So a couple other points I wanted to hit were some other, like, I want to paint the picture for you, basically, of what Spanish colonization looked like. So there was really limited access to land, resources, and jobs, which led to a lot of resentment and resistance. And like I said earlier, these began as like localized struggles and resistances because we weren't the Philippines yet, right? There were a lot of educated elites, mestizos, ilustrados. There's like a 5-tier system of like classes, like, and these people, these educated folks were bringing these like liberal ideas of like what nationhood and independence could look like, right? So like the power of like education. But also like they used that class system to sort of oppress us. And I think we can also think about that today and like, like what class are we from? And like, where do we fit in this society, right? And who's doing that to us? Who is putting us in those classes? Yeah, and so finally, like Martin said, a national consciousness emerged when these various regions recognized the similar struggles experienced by these different regions at the cost of Spain, and hence the climax of the Philippine Revolution. Next, please. Okay, quickly, how did the transfer of power occur from Spain and to who? Literally. Literally. 20 mil, okay? That's how much we were worth. But 3 countries. Who is it? Guam? I think Cuba, right?
Include Guam. There's actually 4. So, actually, sorry, I'm like thinking here.
Please. I'm almost done.
So yeah, someone said it in Paris, Treaty of Paris, right? 1898, something like that. Yeah. So the Philippines was sold to, uh, Spain sold Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam, if you include Guam, for 20 million US dollars. I don't know how much is it now, but like, bruh. So rather than lose to us, actually, rather than the Filipinos and Americans winning against Spain, they'd rather sell us, which is,
But we don't want to bum you out. Uh, um, to close, no. Okay, seriously, what do you guys think? Was the Philippine Revolution of 1898 a victory for the Filipino people or not? Let's talk about it. We can have an open discussion. Oh my God, y'all look sad. I didn't do a good job. Were shifted from one nation state to another. And so I think like we need to remember that. And if we even look at like photos of like the Treaty of Paris, it literally happened in the Treaty of Paris. Like were Filipinos even at the table? Like, I don't know. But that's not to say that it still wasn't a victory. Because if we look at like the whole timeline, which we're gonna get into, like that was still a huge victory for us. For people across these 7,000 islands, which aren't even connected by land, to be able to say, oh, we're undergoing a common struggle against this beast called Spain, and we're gonna organize together and fight them collectively via an underground fucking secret club like the Katipunan. Huh? Like that's crazy, right? Like, yes, we became independent from one colonial exploitative Spain, but we also built this like national consciousness that, oh, like we can all band together and like fight this thing together, and we're no longer these like solo dolo little baby islands. Like we're so much powerful if we do band together and recognize that national consciousness. And so although the nation was too young and naive to foresee the larger, more insidious harms of US imperialism, the end of Spanish rule in the Philippines was still a huge victory for the Filipino people. So let's not forget that, okay? Okay. Okay. So part 2, we're going to move into US colonization period with Cabs. And then he's going to take us all the way to present day. So again, I just want to pause in case there are any questions. If you need to move around, nourish yourself. I'm going to get some water. Everyone okay? Rainer?
The, I think it's a question, yeah, the history that we learned now, like from my knowledge, like when we talk about the history, it's very like focused on like the northern part of the Philippines. Whereas I think Mindanao wasn't really occupied until like the Americans came, right? So there's been forever resistance against the Spanish, right? So I think, yeah, my question is, now that we are discussing history and everything, in your work, do we slowly add the perspective that has also not always been sort of at the forefront of the way we tell history?
Yeah, so part of the Philippine legal history actually is to go through different regions during, because it's like 300 years of colonization, and we shorten it in like, I don't know, felt like it's like 2 years, right? But there's actually, I have a list here of freaking revolts from like 16th century, 17th, 18th, 19th, and these are from different parts of the Philippines, especially in the Visayan region, because that's where the Spanish colonization actually started, right? And also in Mindanao, it wasn't even called Mindanao, or like the Sultanate of Jolo or something like that, right? That they didn't even colonize Mindanao. We're gonna get into it into part 2 a little bit, but you know, that's and the struggle of the Moro people in Mindanao is really important, and that's part of the discussion of uh, the. It's actually part of the discussion within the Katipunan as well, because there's separate in the Katipunan revolution, Philippine Revolution is really just Luzon and Visayas, because Mindanao already had a different sultanate, right? And they have a different treaty with the U.S., which the U.S. fucked them up. Well, we're going to talk about later. But yeah, we really need to, because in the 60s, I'm just going to say, like 60s, there was this, reinvigoration of, like, what the hell, the Mindanao should be a separate struggle from the Filipino. It should be like part of it, but also separate one. And that's why there's the MNLF, Moro National Liberation Front, in the Philippines, and part of all of those stuff. But you're right. What we do not talk about with the Philippine Revolution, this is actually Visayas and Luzon, and there's a lot of like resistances in Visayas that's something that we have to actually look at, because most of what's written was in like the NCR, or like that Cavite, Bulacan, Pampanga, but there's actually a lot of resistances in those parts. And if we actually, I Wikipedia it and it's there, it's crazy. I mean, obviously it's not but it's a good start, right? As part of, and like what Victoria said, like that before the resistances were just, sila Gabriela silang. It's just part of it's just a reaction against Spanish colonization, and very regional. But because of the Philippine Revolution 1898, the movement actually became national in scope. And it's sad that the main front is really just Luzon, but the Visayas is actually freaking badass, and we have to, especially the struggle in Cebu, because it's one of the very first colonized land in the Philippines. Yes, Max, I see you. Yeah, but yeah, sorry, did I? Maybe before we go to part two, if people want to go like washroom and get some drinks, or because we're gonna get into a little bit more U.S. fuckeries. Maybe like we'll be back in 5 minutes. Is that yeah? Gonna be talking about. Sorry, I don't have the. But this part is basically we're gonna talk about from U.S. colonialism to maybe like post a little bit of like EDSA revolution. I know we can. It would have been nice to talk about the Bongbong Marcos election, but we can discuss it at the end if people have any questions, right? But yeah, we start with this question. U.S. colonialism from 1898 to, do we actually know still when is the U.S. colonization in the Philippines? When from 1898 to what? Like, what's the year of like U.S. colonialism in the Philippines?
2022.
Or like the official like colonization when they're actually in the Philippines? Sorry? Anyone have any other answers? Do we know, Ashley? I mean, it's good that we do not know. It's good that we do not know because that's how good the U.S. colonization actually is, that we do not even remember it. Like, Yes, okay, go ahead.
I know that it was the 4th of July, but I don't remember the year.
No, you're actually 1946. 1946. Yeah.
Galing.
Right on the money. I'll take the whole box of pulver.
It's yours.
Is that the beer? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
5 minutes in and I'm already.
But the other question is, do we actually know what happened during U.S. colonization?
Like a lot of the structural systems that the Americans implemented, like in education and in politics, is like, yeah, just a copycat, right? Like a duplicate, I guess. So I guess that's how they influenced
Yeah.
our society and people.
So they wanted to establish like military, like militarize it, because it's such a good area to go against like Japan and stuff like that. So they wanted to establish also like the China Sea. They want to implement their presence within just cases of war. So they implemented lots of militarization and base like American
Perfect,
bases
yeah.
and stuff like that. It's still ingrained today.
Very strategic, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a very strategic place to put.
To put U.S. bases, right? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, some
Galing.
of the answers are here. So, during 1898, when the process of transfer of power from Spain to the U.S., the general that was kind of like, I think General McKinley, one of the generals that actually assigned to be in the Philippines, they call it the benevolent assimilation. So what does it mean? So basically, U.S. colonialism introduced policies to promote everything from education, and hygiene to infrastructure. English became the official lingua franca, or basic language, and learning it was encouraged. So from this time, public education was actually open to everyone, not just the elites. And like people who are part of with like mestizos, right? So they actually promised an American-style republic. That this colonization, benevolent assimilation, just basically means that we're gonna colonize you to lead you to your own nationhood. But we'll see, right? We'll see. So that's what they said, what they're gonna do. So just the pictures here, we have Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the third one is the Philippines. Benevolent assimilation. So why did they actually want us to be educated, right? So socially, this is what happened. Socially and culturally, schools were never schools were never expanded in a way that would have allowed the majority of the people to do so. English is the nation's official language, but most Filipinos do not actually speak it. Also, the Catholic Church was left untouched. It stayed influential under U.S. rule. Wealth and power remained concentrated in the hands of a few families. The Americans didn't alter the socio-economic order, co-opting the native elite to subdue resistance. Just as their Spanish predecessors had, they depended on the local elites. So basically what happened was that, sorry, I'm just going to read the economy. U.S. had the full access to the Philippines' raw materials, and U.S. finished goods were imported free of tariff. So the U.S. actually basically had access to our, the gold, spices or whatever, like every resource materials that we have, even labor. And what happened by then is that also the finished goods that they brought to the States were brought back here for us to purchase. So the education system was really for us to be able to read so that we can buy the commodities that they actually make. So basically it's just expanding their market so that we buy the goods that actually originally came from us, right? And the trade surplus that the U.S. benefited from the Philippines was actually given back to us via loans. And that's why even back then, all of these things that, they call it we're we're giving you money, you can invest it, but it's actually a loan, even though all of those trade profits or trade surplus were actually, because of us, right? So that's what they call benevolent assimilation. Politically, the U.S. introduced popular elections, but these were games of musical chairs played by the small groups of dynastic families. Land-owning oligarchs and warlords dominated at the local level and shared spoils at the national level. I just wanted to highlight the dynasties and families because they're still here. They're still in the Philippines, right? The dynasties treated the country's institutions as tools for increasing their own wealth and power. Nothing new, no? It's like, fuck. What evolved really was democracy in name or form, but not in substance. Well, basically that's it. Like, up to now, it's still the same shit. But I just wanted to highlight that because the Philippine or like the U.S. colonization was really so different from the cross and the sword that this is actually psychologically colonizing us so that we didn't even know that we're being fucked. They thought that you're being educated, that the infrastructure we're creating are for you, but it's not like when you were in Spanish colonization. It's so blatant. It's so blatant that no, these roads are not for you. These are for the elites. But for U.S. colonization, it's like style shit. And again, we want to focus on, we can talk about the dates and all those facts that we can list all down, but what we actually want for us to remember are the Filipino resistances during this time. We know of do we know the Philippine-American War? Yeah. Do you want to, or does anyone want to talk about it a little bit? Or have an idea what it was? No. So the Philippine-American War happened from 1898 to 1902. So this was the time when we talked about that the Philippine Revolution is really important for us Filipinos because it actually, from regional resistance, it became a national movement. But it also, what happened during that revolution was that some factions in the Katipunan thought that they could basically ally themselves with the U.S. and that the U.S. would actually give them their independence. And one of them was actually Emilio Aguinaldo. So he betrayed Andres Bonifacio because Andres Bonifacio didn't say that, no, fuck that shit, we can actually fight for our own independence. But Emilio Aguinaldo was one of those that also ambitious politically, that he wanted to be the president of the First Republic. But the 1890 or the Philippine-American War happened when the U.S. actually did not recognize Emilio Aguinaldo as the president, and that's when he declared war against the United States. Even though they said it's an Philippine-American War, it was really just one-sided. I remember the notes that I have was there's about 200,000 Filipinos that combatant and non-combatant that actually killed. Basically, 1/6 of the whole population of Luzon. But that was the gist. They thought, the Katipunan's side of Aguinaldo thought that they could work with the United States, but nah, bro. But it didn't. The Filipino resistance didn't stop there. There was a continued resistance. This person's name is called Macario Sakay. It's one of the really greater generals in the Philippines who fought against the U.S. colonization. So basically Macario Sakay, along with other revolutionaries, fought in Bulacan, Pampanga, Laguna, Nueva Ecija, and Rizal. And like what I mentioned earlier too, there's different resistance against the U.S. in other parts of the Philippines. There were the people of Bicol continued to wage war, armed struggle until 1903. And in the Visayas region, they call it the Pulahanes. Basically, particularly in Cebu, Samar, Leyte, and Panay fought fierce battles against the U.S. aggressors and puppet elites. So, from like, I'm just thinking, Victoria and I were talking about this. Do we actually know what happened in the Philippines from like 1900 to like 1920s? All right, like, so it's kind of like erased from like, if you study like history in the Philippines, remember, we don't even talk about these things. From like, after the Philippine Revolution, we talk about Japanese occupation. And I think it's kind of like deliberate that people do not, or like institutions don't want us to remember that the struggle actually, or the resistance actually continued, and that the U.S. colonization actually was so much more intense compared to how, I don't want to say in degree, but like the way that did it for 50 years of colonization was crazier how the Spanish did it. And continues with the Filipino resistance in the Moro Rebellion from like 1899 to 1913. Some books actually say 1916. So I'm just sharing this picture because the red part is actually the part where Spain actually got a hold of Mindanao. So this part here, they didn't even have it, like, and what's messed up was that after the Philippine-American War, the U.S. actually got Mindanao, even though they're not technically part of what we call like the Philippines back in Spanish colonization. So here, just some notes. The Sultanate of Hulu was betrayed by the U.S. The U.S. initially agreeing that they would not annex Mindanao through the Bates Treaty of 1899. And then after they actually quelled the resistance in Luzon and Visayas, they were next. And that's why it was longer from 1913 or 1916. But it is the fiercest armed resistance that was waged against the U.S. It was actually by the people of Mindanao. And we do not even, like, we're not even aware of it, right? I'm just showing this. Ultimately, the resistance were quelled, but the movement for self-determination never died, right? So it's important. I'm just sharing this, even though, oh yeah, what the hell, like they got defeated, but those instances might have been stopped or quelled, but Filipino people actually continued. Like, some of them underground, some of them like through legal battles, but the movement for self-determination never died. Anyone know what self-determination is? I think the person who's late can actually answer it. Sorry, it's my friend. What? Anyone wanna take what a self-determination is? Maybe you wanna answer it. So it's technically it's kind of like similar to when we have national consciousness, where we're in a time of history where nation state is basically how, like, like governments or countries are formed, and as Filipino people, that national consciousness, what it is for movement for self-determination. Like, how can we as a nation, as Filipinos, like, like we want to actually freaking govern our own shit without the influence of colonial powers like Spain or US. That's what it is, really. Does that make sense? Or, yeah. Do you want to repeat it? No. So World War II to 1986. Showing some pictures here. Do you guys know why 1986? Or like what happened in 1986?
Wow. Okay, I need to be out there.
We have more.
everywhere. Go.
So, as we all know, World War II happened from like, how was it, like 1939 to like 1940, 1945? And this is what happened to the Philippines on a nutshell. So 1942, this actually just showed how they don't really care about the Philippines. The U.S. Army withdrew its army in the Philippines to focus on the European front. And that's how Japan was able to capture and occupy the Philippines. And from 1942 to 1945, the Philippines was a puppet government under the Japanese Empire, and Manila was declared an open city. Does anyone know what an open city means if you're in a war?
Hey, momos are here.
So, an example, let's say in France, in Paris during World War II, it became an open city. So, what it means is that they surrendered so that occupying forces would not bomb them.
Hoy, quiet kayo dyan, please.
So, it's just important to know that the Philippines actually, or the Manila was declared an open city, but we'll see what happened afterwards. In 1944, I Shall Return. Do you guys know who mentioned it?
Douglas MacArthur.
Correct.
Ah. I don't have any paper on me.
Do you guys, sorry, this is some toilet jokes. Do you guys know, like for Filipinos that grew up in the Philippines, what we call MacArthur? Tita.
Who? I don't know.
So, sorry, this is gonna sound really bad because it's like the joke in the Philippines when you say, "I shall return." Like it's like a toilet joke. Oh, so basically, like we all know that Gerald. Oh, you wanna go?
No, it's okay, go. No. Do it. It's okay. No, do it.
Okay.
No, it's so let's say when you took a shit, right? And
then you say, I shall.
and there's like
I can't.
sorry. And may natirang tae because the flash didn't finish it, and then it's like it just went back up, and that's why like for MacArthur, like there's a MacArthur happen, and because they Filipinos know that like the MacArthur was actually like the U.S. Army leaving the Philippines just showed how they didn't really care about the Philippines, and that like MacArthur's like fucking shitty general, even though he was known after World War II as the one who saved the Pacific part. But for the Filipino people, the U.S. Army leaving and then just returning after they saved Europe is just like it's like, how can you do this to us, even though you said that as a colony you'd be there for us? So like the Philippines is kind of like just that stupid joke that we had. And 1945 is called the rape. There was the rape of Manila, or the Manila massacre. And I just wanted to kind of like highlight this because even though Manila was an open city, like Paris in France, because during when Hitler actually invaded Paris, it didn't get bombed, or like there was like small resistance pockets outside of the city, but the U.S. what the U.S. Army did was that they used destroyers, tanks, and howitzers to liberate Manila from the Japanese forces. 15,000 plus Japanese killed, 1,000 plus Allied killed, estimated about 100,000 to 240,000 Filipino civilians killed. So 72% of factories, 80% of residential district, and 100% of business district were razed. And it is actually the second most destroyed Allied capital city after Warsaw. So even though, like the end the war was actually at the end, the tail end of it. The U.S. actually destroyed Manila, so that they could say, oh, because Japanese forces are, like, they're messed up, so they have to bomb the city. But they didn't have to. And or the way that they did it was actually super devastating, and it became a significant event in our history. Or why is that? Does anyone know why it became a significant event? Or do you guys familiar with it? Are you guys familiar of the raising? Yeah. Um, do you guys have any idea why they did this, even though it was not required?
Was it to like make it seem like they saved us from Japan?
Partly, yeah. And if you actually destroy 100% of the businesses or infrastructure, what actually required after that?
Like rebuilding, right?
Freaking loans. Freaking loans, right? So, and since the US actually, they know that after World War II, like Germany and other forces, especially in Japan, there's no more competition. That's when they become, oh, when did they, sorry. I think we're gonna go back to it a little bit. But basically, the significance of it is that, yeah, partly to show that, oh, we're back to save the Philippines. But really, so that once you destroy all the factories, then the U.S. actually will be needed back in the Philippines, and through, through loans, and also by them just being there. That's why even though after this time, the Philippines is still not fully independent. And during this time, again, we can talk about all of these stuffs, but do you guys remember or have like familiar with Hook Balahap?
Like I only know like a little bit, but I only know like a little bit because I went to the Cordilleras, and yeah, it's basically like a socialist, am I right? Communist sort of ideology behind it. Uh, I guess also in the same strum of self-determination, but it's very militant. And I only know that because when I went there, like an uncle showed me his sniper rifle. Yeah, because they still do
Cool.
tribal war there, right? So, um, yeah, so yeah, but I don't know anything else more. But the hooks, yeah, it's like a
Anyone wants to? No? I think ikaw. No? Ikaw, dahil na. That's pretty good. Because I'm just gonna say it like in the Philippines, the way that they describe Huk Balahap is like Hukbong Bayan Laban sa Hapon, People's Army against the Japanese forces, really, or also known as Hooks. It's part of the broad United Front resistance against Japanese occupation, right? And it was very instrumental in slowing down the advancement of the Japanese forces in the countryside when the U.S. Army left the Philippines. So even in the like actually just post or during the war, the U.S. actually also like Huk Balahap because they were able to fight along them. There was this movie called The Great Raid where they were able to basically free a lot of American forces with the help of the Hukbalahaps, right? And in the Philippines, Hukbalahap are just known for people that fight during Japanese occupation. Uh, but uh, but actually, our friend there is right. Uh, the Hukbalahap is actually more than just during the Japanese occupation, and more than just a guerrilla fighters, but and against Japanese occupation. They were actually anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, and pro-peasant movement. But the Philippines right now, or like the government after it doesn't want to recognize them as that. They just want to recognize them as people who are useful during the Japanese War, but their actual motive was actually the building of a Filipino national, like a continuation of that, the national liberation of Filipino people. Oh, I just put it here. They're actually from the same lineage as the Katipunans and all the resistance movement that called for the self-determination of the Filipino people. So, like the current narrative or like the mainstream narrative of history in the Philippines wouldn't even recognize this, even though if you look on Wikipedia, it's there. Like in the history books, they would just say, "Oh, they're just useful during the war," but even after the war, they were there for the peasantries, especially when the landlords started to or when the Philippines starting to rebuild, they were the main movement against all of those oppression by the dynasties, especially in Negros, in Pampanga, in Tarlac. Yeah. Any questions? So we had the Philippine Third Republic, 1940s. The first republic is the Aguinaldo presidency, which happened like, I don't know, a couple of months. But the Philippine Third Republic is, so second is during the U.S. colonization, like, I forgot what it's called, but the puppet government, like there's two like presidents back then. Uh, Manuel Quezon, correct, yeah. 19, so the Third Republic's 1946 to 1973. And again, Marvin, right? Martin, sorry. July 4th, 1946, you got it. So this is the time when Filipinos voted for the first time. And Manuel Rojas became the first president of the Republic as a quote-unquote independent nation. Just wanted to emphasize Manuel Rojas because his grandson actually ran for presidency back in 2016, but lost to Duterte. So how you can see that they're still there, like this family are actually still there. So independence. Let me just see. Does anyone know why, or like why did it like independent quote unquote? Like anyone have? Are we actually independent after that? Huh? What? Sorry. Anin James? Sorry.
Don't define independence.
Okay, ikaw nga. Try it.
And then, no more, just ask.
So I guess it's a very good question. Like, let's go back to the what the Katipunan actually want. Are we actually as people free to choose our own course of history as Filipinos? Are we actually able to self-determine our own what we want as people? So I guess that's what independence is from our perspective. Yeah.
I guess you can argue that independence in the sense that Filipinos are running the country. However, it's within a very select Filipinos, right? Like the dynasties of the family. So I think in one way, like you can look at it like, well, yeah, it's independent. It's Filipinos run country, but at the same time, it's a very few select elite families.
Yeah. And you're right. Again, there's this I don't want to say that we didn't earn it because we did. As Filipino people, this has been struggled by our people, right? And we shouldn't forget that this independence was actually, in the making from like 1898, from the Hukbalahap, right, and up to now. But this independence actually also you have to recognize that this is actually independent more for the elite, more for the power that are actually part of the dynastic power of families in the Philippines, so that they can actually run their own shit. Because let's not forget that even though yes they are, they are pro-Filipinos, right? Or like they are the puppets of the U.S. They're also for, like they're also Filipinos. So you cannot just like tell them everything that they or dictate everything to them as Filipinos. So you also have to, the U.S. also had to quell that desire, or like they have to also give what these elites actually also desire, which their own independence, right? But you're right, it's from select few families. I'm just gonna go back to what happened post World War II. Does anyone know what the Bretton Woods Conference was in the U.S. in 1944? So, you guys heard of IMF and World Bank? Yeah. So, and it would show. So basically, Germany and the Axis power was on the brinks of collapse. U.S. were getting ready for a post-war world, and we all know that Britain, France, and other allied nations, including the Soviet Union, USSR, were devastated, and U.S. actually became or would end up as the strongest nation in the world. So because of this, they were able to construct like international um, like institutions on how we can actually allocate resources or loans to nations. And its task is basically like, promote and implement market system capitalism in the world against USSR's planned economy socialism. So during this time, again, we can go back on why the US actually bombed Manila, is that because they were actually thinking that they're going to be able to implement IMF and World Bank, and through those institutions, Manila would actually borrow money from these institutions, which is controlled by the U.S. And with that, what the question is, what does the IMF actually or the World Bank do to countries and nations? What are the yeah.
It's a international monetary fund, right? So they give you loans and stuff like that for certain asterisks, I guess, right? So it is in the favor of someone, just so there's the illusion of there's progress or like uplift. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a system that benefits maybe not necessarily us. You know what I mean?
Anyone wants to try? Dylan, I think you want. Oh. So yes, so there's a catch on what, or before we can give you money, there has to be some changes that needs to happen in your country, right? So I'm just gonna, just the second point. Or maybe the first one. So currencies are pegged to the U.S. dollars rather than to gold. I mean, we can talk about economy, but just basically a big part of it. And creation of World Bank and International Monetary Fund. And the one that you're talking about, it's the structural adjustment programs. Basically, to be able to borrow funds or loans, states or government must open its markets, privatize, decentralize, and later on apply austerity measures, or what we call now, or if you're familiar with it, like neoliberalism, that what they throw around during in the news. So here, this is actually in Urban Dictionary. Alright, so it's legit, you know. So if we look at it, economics. So I'm just gonna read it so that we can finish a little bit faster. International Bank created after World War II to create currency stabilization. Main policy tool consists of lending money to central banks of countries facing a crisis. Uh, so in some cases, as when a member government is insolvent, the IMF will impose a structural adjustment programs called SAP, requiring for government to jettison programs it has to serve the poor. For this reason, the IMF is often harshly criticized. So so that's why the one of the big factors why the Philippines got this independence is because the U.S. didn't actually have to be there to be its colony. It can be colonized economically through IMF and World Bank. So, I mean, it's true that yes, it is our independence, but the U.S. actually was able to design a system where, they can actually control our economy without being actually present in that country, because they know that being present there is also expensive. But they also have still their bases. Aside from those, they actually left the Philippines, but they're still there economically. We're still tied in their market. Uh, so yeah, just a note there. Treaty of Manila, July 1946. U.S. quote unquote helped the rebuilding of Manila and the Philippines. Uh, so independence or a neo-colony. This is actually a debate that's been happening in the Philippines. I mean, there's a lot of like folks that still uh, that they know that this is not actually quote unquote independent, and it's actually called a neo-colony, meaning like colonization that what Spain did, or early 20th century, where the presence of the U.S. had to be there. The U.S. didn't had to be physically there. It's just we just control your economy, and that's what basically means being a neo-colony. Um, does anyone have any question? Okay, cool. We all know this shit, right? Okay, gee, some people call it semi-colony, neo-colony. I don't know. It's like, maybe if you guys want to research it. I'm just gonna show you. This is actually the actual coat of arms of the Philippines. This is like the government's, nakikita niyo yung the Toronto, City of Toronto, merong logo. This is the government, the Philippine government's logo. And if you see, meron pa rin yung, this part here, which if you know, this is actually U.S. Like the American, is it American Eagle? I think it's the American Eagle. So it's just fucked up. Like currently, we still have it. They removed it a few times, but this is still it's the official. And this one is actually the lion part is part of the history of how the Spain became a like the origin of the Spain is the like what's in Spain, how Spain became a colonial power. So that's one of the coat of arms of the families that started it. There's the term Castellanos. The Castellanos coat of arms, or like where it originated, is actually this freaking lion, and this is a U.S. So the coats of arms of the Philippines still has this shit, even though we are independent, right? I don't know. Just when I saw that, I was like, "What the fuck? Why is it still there?" So I'm just gonna quickly continue this, like the presidents after Manuel Rojas. There's the Quirino presidency, and really, these people are just campaign on platforms of completely loyal to the U.S. Signed a treaty facilitating the entry of U.S. and managerial personnel in the Philippines, and reforms labor laws. Very loyal to U.S., touted as father of foreign service. I just want to highlight that because, you might see these last names again and remember that, yeah, these families are freaking still control like a large portion of the economy. Ramon Magsaysay, have you guys know Ramon Magsaysay? You want to? Or just what do you know? What do you know about?
He didn't finish his term because he died through a
But-
plane crash.
Yeah. What do you know about his like charisma or like?
He is like one of the best presidents. I don't know, but yeah, 'cause
No.
he's very charismatic, and that's all that I know.
That's perfect. I just separated Ramon Magsaysay. I didn't really highlight or make the last name super big because he's one of those president that actually, what you would call maybe kind of like the NDP. at the time, like really pro people and wanted like a little bit more betterment for the Filipino people, unlike like uh, like the previous presidents and the ones after him. Uh, but there was this law that he actually enacted during his presidency called the Noli Fili Law, or requiring the study of results writing, but not of Bonifacio's contributions. And like what I said, known as the man of the masses and savior of democracy, constructed green style of governance. I just want to highlight the Noli Fili law regarding study of results writing. Uh, Maybe I'm just gonna put in the next one. So, so Noli Fili law. Noli basically means the Noli Metangere. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the book. I think Christina, the book, Tangerine. Noli Tangerine. And the El Filibusterismo. So basically, it's the. Does anyone know what they are, or like familiar with it? Like, you heard of it, right? Yeah. So basically, those are the like two books that that the Rizal was kind of like really like famous for. So basically, it criticizes the church. It criticizes the colonization of Spain, and basically just wanted Filipino people to be independent from these institutions, and and it was really important for Filipinos to actually just implement that, right? But it was also very strategic why it's Jose Rizal that we have to study in the Philippines and not Andres Bonifacio. Because in the you hear in the news, or if you hear if you talk about Philippine history, they always say that Jose Rizal is the national hero of the Philippines. Sorry, you said what? Or but yeah, sorry, yeah, again, but there's actually nothing in the Constitution that says he is the national hero. There are numerous national heroes in the Philippines, but it just became convenient that Jose Rizal became more famous because Jose Rizal didn't actually call for violent means of or fighting for resistance. For him, we say that you can just passively, or like don't, it shouldn't be violent. If you want to resist, it should be through peaceful means. And Andres Bonifacio is the opposite. For him, no, it's gonna take a fucking bloody war for us to gain our independence. So for the Philippine government to actually put this as a Republic Act is pretty smart, so that it's in the consciousness of Filipino people that it's better to fight passively rather than be like a real katipunero where you actually die for it. Uh, Does that make sense? Or yeah. Yeah, sure.
So when Kebs and I were prepping for this, I was like, oh my God. So like writing and like poetry is still so powerful, right? Because of what Rizal was able to do. And like it just reminded me and like affirmed me of like our work through This Is Home. And yeah, like just documenting our stories and experiences as immigrants and navigating colonial Canada through poetry, through storytelling, and just, yeah. So it's just so powerful, like, because I was talking to a Jamaican colleague, and he does some work out in Little Jamaica, and like trying to protect it as like a heritage site, BIA type thing. And like the Jamaican community has been here way longer than the Filipino community. But even for them to look back into their archives and like struggle to find like documentation of like your presence here is so big. And so I think some of the things that we've been thinking about as creatives is like, how do we take This Is Home, the book, and keep letting it live on beyond just, this book that you buy and like hopefully you read and don't let it collect dust on your shelf. And so some other things that we've been thinking about, I know, sorry, Kebs, I'm like taking up space, is like, how do we document like BBs and Sorry Not Sorry as like a place where Filipinos come together, and like what does it mean to us? For me, Sampaguita is a restaurant out in Bathurst and Wilson. Yes, yes, work. And like have so many fond memories. Yes, hell yeah. With my sinigang, with my family to like celebrate birthdays, and like I would love to hold like an event like this there, but also document it, right? So that even if people and like land developers and whatever like condo developers come through and try to like buy these spaces and places from us, we have that documentation to say, nah, we've been here, and this is where we gather, and this is what these places mean to us, as one way to sort of archive our history and be like, nah, we are here. This is home. Okay, that's all.
There's actually a limited edition of our book where it actually there's a part where how to wage a revolution. So if you wanna, it's a tribute to.
It's a sequel.
He actually tried to again tried to quell that resistance within the bourgeoisie or the upper class by implementing Filipino first, and this is kind of like the seeds of again it shows there seeds of implementing martial law, and Diosdado Macapagal, the father of Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, another president, instituted the control or open door policy with the imposition of IMF, free inflow of imports through more tariffs reductions, no interest in Filipino industrialization. Government and corporations were made to borrow directly from the World Bank and IMF, and peso to dollar basically just increased 100%. And our favorite boy, Ferdinand Marcos. So he's the president from like 1965, 1984. So there, actually, let's look at it in a more critical lens. That in the beginning of his campaign, he actually tried to implement nationalist trend, meaning that he knows that there's a growing anti-U.S. and anti-imperialist movement, and wanted actually for the Philippines to nationally industrialize. When you're online, you read that he built this cultural center of the Philippines, the Philippine Heart Center, or like light rail transit or LRT in Metro Manila, and many more infrastructures. Businesses projects were given to local elites, granted them loans and money for this construction. So I mean, he tried, he actually tried, but with actually trying to also making his loyalist friends rich, right? So there's always that catch. So in the process, Philippine national debt ballooned. Oh, bless you. Ballooned from $2 billion to $30 billion after his term. Peso to dollar from $6 to 20 pesos. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but during the election, the recent election in the Philippines, they always say that the Marcos presidency was the golden age of the Philippine history in Philippine history. But there's actually a lot of notes to debunk that yes, he actually there was a trend to industrialize the Philippines and build roads and infrastructure. But then again, do we actually owe it to them that we voted for them to do this, right? So this is the one that we kind of like talk more in depth when the Philippine critical history is actually a couple of days, that to pay the debts of the Filipinos and to quell the resistance from the people, he actually implemented the labor export policy. So basically, actually, does anyone know, even though it's already there, are familiar with what the labor export policy is? Have you guys heard of it? Sorry, who said yes? Oh.
I'll try. Oh, here, exports of Filipino people instead of products, goods, and raw materials. No, I just wanted to add that, like, when I was in the Philippines, they have a lane for OFWs, or overseas foreign workers, and it's wild to think that, like, that's a category. And, like, everywhere I had to do, like, a COVID screening to go to, like, Palawan or wherever, that was a category, overseas foreign workers. So just the fact that, like, from 1980 something, that is still happening today. And I think maybe some of our family or relatives are OFWs. Yeah, it's wild to think that, like, people have been commodified as the goods. And you'll see it, like, if you go to Bathurst and Wilson or anywhere, you'll see like a remittance place, like a Western Union. And it's not just our community, right? It's like a lot of immigrant communities that have to, like, send money to where they're from because they're supporting their folks. And how are they supporting their folks? Are they doing it as caretakers, as Rainer said earlier? And if they're caretakers, caregivers, do they have benefits and job security? Probably not, right? And so, yeah, that's my take on LEP.
Yes, so my aunt, my very first aunt that came to Canada was from 1968. So there's a lot of Filipinos that actually left for the Philippines because of this policy. These people are university or college educated, and either they're going to be part of the resistance movement against Marcos. So Marcos actually gave them a way, or like to escape this, or also so that he would be able to quell all of this unrest that there's no job really in the Philippines, is to send these Filipinos, highly educated Filipinos, outside the Philippines. So, like what Victoria said, like they were able to give money back, or like through remittances. So, the Philippine economy actually was able to become like to be afloat during this crisis. At the same time, what's crazier is that these students or these younger people actually, you were able to quell the resistance movement during his um, during the martial law years. And if you think about it, it's pretty smart. All right, like freaking guy. So during the the debate, or like during interviews for Bongbong Marcos presidency, he was asked, "What do you plan for these people, or like for OFWs, so that they don't have to go out of the Philippines?" And there was this one interview when he actually said, that one of his plans is to continue talking to other countries so that they would get better jobs outside the Philippines. Like, bruh. So they don't like they don't have he doesn't have a plan for Filipinos to stop leaving the Philippines. And it's sad because the Filipino people actually don't see that, and it's actually his dad. And it's crazy too when you actually look at the absentee, or like people who voted the Marcoses outside the Philippines. A majority of them are actually, I mean, during the election, there's a lot of them are actually pro BBM, and he's the reason why a lot of the times is because of this labor export policy that was implemented during his time.
But wasn't there also lots of pro Lenny?
Sorry,
Wasn't there also lots of pro Lenny supporters?
there are, yeah. But there's also a lot because I mean, let's face it, Marcos won by like 31 million, like doubled the vote of
Nah, it was rigged. It's fake news.
it is right.
Sorry, she's a hopeless.
I'm just gonna again. We talked about all of these crazy implements by the government, but let's not forget that there's always the resistance movement behind it, right? So there was this term during the 70s, 80s called baliktarin ang tatsulok, or basically reverse the triangle. I think just I have a picture of the triangle. So the triangle basically meaning that it's the 1% at the top. So we want the magsasaka or farmers and the workers to be on top. So that's just basically what it means. So during this time, there's a rise of mass movements and radical imagination of the society in the Philippines, especially from the youth like us, and and underground too, like like especially from uh, especially from the youth and student sector. So there was this organization called the Kabataang Makabayan in 1964 and Samahan ng Demokratikong Kabataan in 1967 and Makibaka, which is a Filipino women-led organization in 1970. I'm just gonna highlight that a little bit earlier because it's important for us to recognize this. So basically, during this time, saw that the basic problems of the Filipino people were U.S. imperialism, feudalism, and bureaucrat capitalism. I mean, there's a lot of ism. Basically, the U.S. is owned the Philippines economically and politically, but because of through the bureaucrat capitalism or the local elites. So basically, that's just what it means. So that the imperialism works because the local elites actually approves it, and at the end, it's the workers and the peasantries that are actually not benefiting from all of this. So for them, the solution is the national democratic revolution, or the self-determination as a nation and advancement of socialism. So this is like the reimagining of not just of the Philippines, but also of the world. I'm not sure, are you guys familiar what's happening in the 60s and 70s globally? Yeah. Like, you guys maybe here in North America, like the hippies and shit. All right. So it's also product of that, right? I think I have so just showing it here, the global situation, there's actually this movement where we want, like the youth actually wanted to freaking destroy the old and build a new world. There's a lot of growing anti-US, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-colonialist movement, mostly led by the youth. To name a few, there was happening in Cuba in 1953. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Palestinian Liberation Organization. It's one of the organization in Palestine that actually resisted against Israeli occupation. The Black Panther Party in the U.S. was also part of that during that time. The Paris protest in 1968. So there's a lot of populist socialist election or that elected socialists in Latin America, such as Argentina and Chile, and also in China, there was this ongoing revolution. So this is just the Philippines' response to that. That maybe you guys heard of the term post-colonial. So this is where the post-colonial reimagination of actually started happening, especially in Africa, in South Asia, and the Philippines, also part of that movement, of that global movement. And some pictures. Again, Maria Clara Laosna, meaning Maria Clara. How do you say it? What's Laosna? Sorry?
Outdated, though.
Outdated, yes. I just wanted to highlight this organization, Makibaka. So it's the Makabayang Kilusan ng Bagong Kababaihan. So basically, it's a women-led organization that that tackled not like patriarchy, but we have to talk about patriarchy with capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism. So, if you guys have you guys heard of organizations like Gabriela or Affirm in the U.S. and actually also for us here, the Philippine Women's Center. If we are progressive Filipino women, we are actually product of this history. And I just wanted to highlight that because the Philippines were also one of the few countries who started, like yung women-led organization, so that we can fight patriarchy and had that radical consciousness. And one of them was the Maria Lorena Barros, one of the co-founders of this organization. Um, Again, another resistance movement, again led by the youth from January to March 1970. It's a period of civic unrest in the Philippines, mostly in Metro Manila, but also a lot of it in Cebu and in Negros. Cebu and Negros because they're highly rich in resource materials such as sugarcane, and you need that to be imported in the United States. So led mostly by the students with labor unions and civic groups. 100,000 plus joined in rallies and demonstration. It was the time when neutrals become radicals. So basically the goals, I think it's a similar thing that's been happening here in Canada, like removing internal issues in schools like tuition hikes, addressing corruption, poverty, and economic crisis, call for systemic change in the government. Just gonna, or even younger, that they were able to reimagine or build the movement, that even through their young age. So it means that for us to, we're able to. It's possible for us to reimagine it, to reimagine a world where, or like even here in Canada, where like Filipinos or people of color doesn't have to be freaking, superly exploited, or there shouldn't be freaking racism anymore, right? So we can, I really want to highlight that because they were the same age as us, really. Uh, I'll just here. First quarter storm significance resulted in the radical politicization of great number of people and the recruitment to mass organization. Actually, maybe I'm gonna ask you guys. Maybe your parents are actually part of it too. My parents actually were part of the student movement back then, and I didn't even know until I mentioned it to them, and I thought I knew shit, and they were like, "Oh, I've been part of it." It's like, what the fuck? How come you didn't tell me? Well, I didn't know that you wanted to know it, right? So a lot of actually Filipinos that came here, Filipinos that started the Philippine Women's Center in Vancouver were actually part of this movement, and now they're actually in their 60s. So also they're part of the anti-Marcos movement, and we're a product of that history, and that's the lineage of our history as progressives, as Filipinos here in Canada. So that's where you hear the makibaka, wag matakot, and really one of the factors that led to the declaration of martial law, which is true. Almost all of the progressive, radicals, left-leaning, socialist Filipinos were part of this. This is just one of my favorite poem. Any question? Actually, that's a lot of information. Do you guys actually heard of first quarter storm before, or like this kind of history of Filipino people, or this history, our history? Have you guys heard of this before? Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. So it's crazy because I was actually able to, or we were able to study. I personally were able to study this by actually, because at U of T there's no courses like Filipino history courses. So I studied Cuban history and history in South America, and a lot of their history were so connected in the Philippines, and that's what I found out, that all of this like resistance movement in Cuba, in like even Chile, they mentioned Philippines. I was like, the fuck, right? So all of these movements were all connected. These young people were all connected, even though like if I try to imagine it, like there's no Facebook, how did they freaking know? But they know it's possible, and they were reimagining it, right? So how much more for us that we have social media and shit, right? Yeah. And again, it's not being taught to us because they don't want us. They don't want us to know this. Um, uh, so I think we all know there was a martial law suspension in September 21st, 1972. Suspension of civil law, civil rights, habeas corpus, meaning that the state can basically uh, arrest you without any reason, or like like legitimate reason. Right? Philippines is placed under the control of the military, AFP. Civil unrest was rampant, not happy with the current social, economic, and political situation in the Philippines, and also wait for Marcos to extend his term of presidency. Because I think his presidency would end in 1973 if he didn't declare martial law. And he cannot run for the second term. Uh, and again, going back to the US intervention, so it's actually supported by the US. Did not want any anti-US and anti-imperialist move sentiments to continue. So for the U.S., yeah, let's just either get rid of them by killing them or get them out of the country. So they wanted the national industrialization project to die down. Supported Marcos. In return, Marcos had to protect and secure the interests of the U.S. government and corporations. It's basically a cheaper and more efficient way of maintaining economic and political interest. Some families, I'm not sure if you guys are going to be familiar with it. It's Lucio Tan, like the owner of the Philippine Airlines. The Ding Kuangko, which is crazy, is the father of Cory Aquino, is actually a loyalist. So when there's like a debate about how come if like if you're pro Marcos, they would always say, how come you're protecting the Aquinos? No, I'm not. They're both the same, same token. It's just different family. Because like Danding Kuangko, Cory's mom, is actually BBM's grandfather when he was baptized. So like, it's the same shit, right? And maybe you heard of Zobel de Ayala. Henry C. is like the owner of, I think, SM. And of course, the Marcoses. I just found this meme. I'm actually not sure if the money was correct, but it's like, but we all know it's like it's correct. Uh, so martial law estimated money plundered about $10 billion. I'm not sure how much it is now with inflation. That about 3,500 killed, 35,000 tortured, and 70,000 incarcerated. About 25,000 were tortured, mutilated, and dumped for public display, and 700 disappeared. Most of the victims were actually human rights and pro-democracy activists. Some of the names there, a lot of them are actually women. Uh, I don't know, it's just, they're just more fighters than men a lot of times. Uh, and a lot of them like were raped, and it was just fucked up things that did by the AFP, by the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Just wanted to really remember all of these names because they were the leading figures in fighting martial law. Because we always see like Filipino men, but there's actually a lot of Filipino women that led these resistances. We're almost there. So there's the EDSA Revolution of 1986. Obviously, the removal of Marcos from the office. Corazon Aquino became the president, and transfer of power from the Marcoses to the Aquino family. Again, both oligarchs, and this is again backed up by the U.S. I think like what Brian mentioned earlier, the Philippines still colonized by the U.S. partly. So the U.S. wanted to quell the nationalist revolutionary upsurge because during the martial law, it actually just skyrocketed. Like Filipino youth actually joined the revolutionary movement, right? Went to the mountains, and for the U.S., this has to stop, and and they did this by supporting the EDSA revolution. They actually also told Marcos that you had to step down, and that the army of the Philippines actually also were told that you shouldn't shoot, right? And that's why it became peaceful with the U.S. intervention. Uh, so supported different oligarchs to implement its interest. But in return, what was re-implemented was liberal democracy in the Philippines. I guess I'm just gonna end it. But one last question here. EDSA, revolution, people power. Again, same thing with the question earlier for the Philippine Revolution. Is it really a victory for the Filipino people? And is it a revolution? Um, and I mean, I put here ended dictatorship, showed the power of the masses mobilization, also its limits, and did EDSA revolution actually restore democracy? Maybe we can start, or like the first one, really. What do you guys think, or is it really a victory for the Filipino people? Especially now that the Marcoses are back in the Philippines. It's like,
Spicy question.
I mean, it ended the whole extrajudicial killings on and like mass like criminalization of everything. Lots of people were red tagged, right? Like just this mass like militarization against people, and when you saw pictures, there's like everyone's EDSA is like a highway, and it was like full of people, like the whole highway, and to see them all come out, like that's just to me very powerful. Just to take someone out, he literally fled his like mansion in a helicopter that's I think the U.S. might have given him or whatever, and literally was like, let's go, and like packed like 10 million pesos in a bag and like left, right? Like I wish we could do that now with his son, but like that was like years of people mobilizing themselves, and you know, I was there, and they like had songs and all of these to mobilize each other, and I heard some of those songs, and they were actually very beautiful, especially when Duterte was in reign, especially with the extrajudicial killings. Like people also came together and empower others and the youth to take him out. But for sure, I think it's definitely a victory. I don't know how else like it wouldn't be, but yeah.
That's Trajan.
anyone want to have another shot of it?
Sure.
Oh.
Oh, and then we'll go to that.
The question was that if that was a victory, right?
Yes, yeah.
Uh, I agree. There's like a lot of beautiful things that came out of the revolution. I mean, it was also a woman that was on top during the time as leader. I mean, then I guess the next woman was Arroyo, right? Which some also say is a villain to some. But I think just this progress of chipping away the barriers that are still in they're still embedded in our society. Yeah, I think we're slowly getting there. You know, like even this, like we're discussing this. So I don't know. There's a victory, but we low key know like yeah, there's a final boss though. You know, so I mean, so I don't know, but for sure we're on a good way. I say.
Who's the final boss, though? China? Anybody? Thanks, Mike.
I agree about about the victory part, especially about like the potential for the masses, like just the potential of the collective to like rise up against power, right? But I think I'm gonna be a little bit more pessimistic, unfortunately, especially like just seeing what happened over the COVID pandemic in the Philippines, over Duterte's presidency, especially. I feel like it's been brewing up to that point where, and then, yeah, It felt like during the Duterte presidency, it was like only a matter of time until we reached back to the Marcos legacy, and it literally went back to it in the the latest elections, right? I think what's interesting is like in terms of like the power of mass mobilization, especially for this year's election cycle, was the mass support that Marcos got. I think I have a unique perspective on this because I'm Ilocano, while BBM. No, but like my mom and my dad, and I know like a lot of the people in my family were really pro BBM, and I was like really curious about it in the beginning. It's like I thought that the atrocities of martial law, of Marcos's martial law, was really clear, but kind of digging deeper into social media, the social media storm and the mass disinformation campaign that happened throughout, especially during COVID. Dig deeper into that, and I think there's like, it's like mass mobilization, but like I guess in the other direction, right? Like the power of social media during COVID, I think was a really big part of like, yeah, of like kind of destabilizing kind of the information and the facts and the history of Philippines, and that really led towards the like kind of the return. I don't want to say it's the return. I feel like it's always been there, but just the literal return of the Marcos legacy. So, did it restore democracy? I don't know. I think what you said about the transfer of power was really appropriate. It was just from one oligarch to another. But it does make me think about like what's possible with social media. I know that I think we have more power here in like North America, especially, or at least outside of Philippines, because red tagging still exists. Unfortunately, it didn't end during the EDSA revolution, and especially during the Duterte legacy. I think there was a. I'm not the law escapes my mind, but there was like there was a specific one where you could the administration could label specific people like terrorists or like actual threats, and like I feel like that's just red tagging in another like light, right? Like how does the government decide what terrorists are? And then if you notice what the people that have been kind of labeled as such, it's like the people who are radical in terms of people's rights, trying to go for like I guess anything that kind of smells like it's going into a communist direction. Anyone that was showing that, they were red taped immediately, pretty swiftly. So I think the victory is in showing, yeah, just summary. I think the victory is in kind of showing like, yeah, the power of the collective is really powerful, and the limits is that like it depends. I feel like it depends also a lot on the kind of how do we disseminate this information about our history, but the real facts about our history. And in their case, it was like how can they mobilize misinformation, so that to promote the Marcos presidency again. So that's like the power of it and also its limits, right? As to whether it restored democracy, I'm inclined to disagree just because of like I guess what I've seen, but I have hope. I think just again with the Lenny movement, I was really heartened by the fact that it was a lot of youth, even outside. So even outside of Philippines, like I know a lot of Filipino friends in like Dubai and Singapore that were like, man, they heard all about Lenny and they're like supporting and they're spreading a lot of information about that within their own communities in Dubai and Singapore. So I think that's like outside of that little bubble in the Philippines, there's a lot of hope for, I guess, us. There's a very unique position that we have here outside of the Philippines where we can clearly see outside of that, like, outside of Facebook, I guess, that Facebook misinformation bubble. But yeah, I think there's still a lot of hope. Even though I'm very pessimistic, I think there's a lot of hope with instilling democracy back. Yeah.
Victoria C. Max.
I think, yes, just to reiterate or add on to the points that have been made. Yes, at that time, there was victory of some sort that happened, but I think at this point in time, especially with the recent elections that just happened, yes, social media, there's a lot of power that it holds, and I've noticed it a lot in terms of us, the younger generation, but also the older ones, boomers, even the older generations. Like with Facebook and whatnot, there's a lot of disinformation, historical revisionism that has been happening, that really influenced how the voters voted during the recent elections. And it was also a question of, yes, the younger generation has grown to become a lot more smarter than the older ones, forward thinkers, very how do I say that? Woke, critical, progressive. Thank you. But who are the actual voters that went and voted? Went to the, was it precincts? Is that how they vote in the Philippines? Who are the actual people who went to the precincts and voted? Older ones. The older ones that have been influenced by Facebook, by this massive disinformation. So yeah, I think, yes, at that time there was victory, but I feel like, in my opinion, we're definitely digressing. Yes.
I'm not sure if y'all know this documentary is called A Thousand Cuts. It's a Rappler, I guess. It talks about Rappler and all that, but it basically like describes there's like some sort of force that creates misinformation, and I mean, we all know about that. How corrupt it is back home and how easily you can buy a vote, and on top of that, this active misinformation campaign and revision, right? It leads to, it led my auntie to do a TikTok for BBM. Like, I was shocked, I was shocked. So, yeah, but but my cousins are like, I don't want to even want to know. But I think like we are like my bunsos and everything, they trying to figure out what their role is, or like where they position themselves. How do they participate in the way they want to participate? And I think like the work that we do, you know, adds to that experience, you know, and adds to this collective like just discussion and discourse. And I think as long as there's discourse, and even with someone that, I got people that really ride the BBM mobile, which is fine, you know, like we at least get to hear that, you know, we get to hear the perspectives and perspectives, and I think it just enables us to kind of build this sort of foundation and just energy that, because in the end, I mean, a lot of our folks come from poor places, and honestly, we just want to see everyone prosper, right? So I think as long as that, as Filipinos, that's at the center, you know, family, but then community, barangay, I think it will eventually get there. So I don't know how I transitioned from pessimism to a little optimism, but yeah, like you said, there's hope, or like I feel like there's a little star. You know what I mean?
I'm just gonna say that the only positive thing about BBM is that they actually had free lechon at. We were gonna go. It's like, yo, we gotta get that lechon, bro. But sorry, does anyone want to add more, or like just let it out? All this fuckery.
Well, Rainer talked about the role of youth, right? Like his mga bunso, like their youngest. But it brings back what you were talking about, like people power, right? That was a youth and student movement. And today in 2022, in 6 months, Lenny's campaign was a whole lot of youth that was able to mobilize in the matter of 6 months. And so I think one of our dear friends, Boom, Natasha, who designed the cover of our book, This Is Home, she's an artist out there. You know, she thought, what if they started earlier, right? What if their campaign started earlier? Imagine how much more powerful that would have been, right? So yeah, like that's the role of your bunsos, your cousins and shit. Like, and here in Canada, what is our role as youth? We're still youth, right? As organizers, as students, as artists, as writers, as music heads, like what are we putting forward with our art, with our music, with our writing, right? Like, yeah, you can be an artist, but like what are you actually saying with your art, right? And this summer, being that we're in BBs, we're in Sorry Not Sorry, which is a space that uses music as part of its entertainment, its business, its whole culture. How do we look at music in that way, right? What kind of music are we playing? What kind of artists are we playing? And what kind of songs are we writing, right? And how can we express ourselves through music in a way that reflects our issues and what matters to us most, right? And I love always referring to Dags, who is our late friend and member, rapper, artist, organizer. What's my favorite song? It's basically about my folks. It's called My Folks. I believe it started out as a poem and then it became a song. And every time I'm like, oh my God, organizing is so hard. It's so tiring. Like, I look at that music video and I'm like, wow, this is exactly what it's all about. And I remember like one of my first events coming to this space, UKPC, it was called Roots Rhymes Resistance. It's a fundraiser that we put on to allow performers, artists, spoken word artists to perform. We have like a little open mic portion, and he was able to like get the crowd hyped and like chant like scrap the LCP, which is the Live-In Caregiver program, which we'll get into another day. And I'm like, holy shit, I didn't know we had woke Filipinos here. Like, I was 17 and all I knew was like basketball and, you know, Filipino parties for cultural associations. Shout out to the Sambuanguita Cultural Association. But I didn't know that we had conscious, woke Filipinos. And I was like, wow, like there's a space for us, and like we're hella knowledgeable and educated, and like we really know our history, and like how powerful that is. So yeah, that's a plug for the next BUBK Sundays. Yeah, gang gang. Every other Sunday, pull up. Sorry, I'm taking up space again. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of like bring it back to like us, right? And fit us into this context of the history, because, okay, now we know the history, but where do we fit in? And I think that's it.
You can take all the space you want. Sorry. Okay.
I know we started with EDSA and like we're already 2022.
Yeah. So it's a trick question. It's really a victory, right? I don't want like like a lot of youth actually, like our previous member also, or like the one that were not able to attend today, asked like, so what's the fucking point? I was like, no, like I mean, I didn't say like no, or like. No, it's like this continuous struggle of Filipino people. We cannot deny that. This is our victory, right? This is the victory of our people, and this is their work, and it cannot be denied to us. Even the elites or the U.S., they cannot deny that this happened, and this is through the mobilization of the people. And I know that there's a lot of pessimism during BBM's, being elected. I mean, for me personally too, I couldn't work that Monday. Like the fuck, I couldn't just work. I was like, oh, I wish I could just like call in sick. I mean, but you know, but history showed us that they can be defeated, right? So we already have history that shows that this fucking fascist can be fucking defeated, and trust me, they're gonna go down, right? They're gonna go down. So, yeah. And these people during the 70s, that's what they saw, and it took them 13 years for that EDSA revolution. So for us, we never know, but it will happen. History has shown that this will happen, right? So yes, maybe a little sad. I mean, we can be sad and sing karaoke afterwards, but bro, we got to end it. That's something that we here in the diaspora can actually take from us. Like, we are not familiar with this history that our fucking, like Filipinos are actually freaking, the resistance that actually, there's a lineage of it. From regionalist resistance, it became a national resistance, and it became imperialism, anti-colonial, and that's something that we can bring with us here in Canada as part of because the struggle here is different. Obviously, we also have to learn what's happening in the Philippines, but here we're in the belly of the beast, right? So let's look at that history, and I know that there's also a lot of interest with understanding our pre-colonial history. But aside from that, we can always continue it and understand that we have a freaking, a lot of experience as Filipinos, as people, in resisting. And this is what actually our want us to take away as people in the diaspora, that we may not be there to wave, next EDSA revolution, but we're here to continue that struggle, that resistance against Canadian colonialization, like white settler imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy, and all that shit. Right? So we got this. Ready to party?
Let's go! Are you gonna warm us up on that karaoke?
Later, dude.
Yes, you are. Stick around, and I just don't know why. It's not like I meant, baby, you never worry about what I do.